Every night at 8:30, a black car would slow at the corner of Dunbar and Fifth, and a man in a dark coat would step out and stand in front of a food cart held together with electrical tape and a prayer. His name was Leonard Ashford. He was the kind of man whose name appeared on buildings. His company employed 460 people in the greater metro area. He sat on the boards of 2 hospitals and a university endowment. He owned a home in the Hill District with a kitchen that cost more to renovate than most people earned in 3 years. He had a private chef on staff who prepared his meals 5 nights a week. And yet, every night he was in town, he stood at a battered cart on the east side of downtown and ordered a bowl of peanut stew and a side of fried plantains from a woman who charged $4 for the bowl and $2 for the side. He never used a credit card. He always paid with cash, exact change. He thanked her. He carried the food back to his car. He ate alone. Nobody in his circle understood it. His driver, a careful man named Roy, who had worked for Leonard for 11 years, stopped asking about it after the 3rd month. Roy had decided it was none of his business. He was probably right. The woman behind the cart was named Celestine. She was 38 years old, 5'4", and she had been at that corner for 6 years, rain or shine, operating a cart that her brother had helped her weld together from salvaged steel in his garage. The awning was a tarp she restaked every evening with bungee cords. The propane burner ran low in winter, and she carried a backup canister in a milk crate lashed to the back. She woke at 5 every morning to start her prep. She was home by 10 if there were no problems. She had 2 children, a son named Marcus, who was 12, and a daughter named Nadia, who was 9. Their grandmother, Celestine's mother, watched them in the evenings while Celestine worked. What most people passing that corner would have seen was a woman getting by. What was actually happening at that cart was something else entirely, and Leonard was the only one who knew it. If you have ever watched someone do something with complete faithfulness day after day and wondered whether they had any idea how much it meant, stay close to this story. Because Celestine did not have any idea at all. Not for a very long time. Celestine grew up in a neighborhood 3 miles north of where her cart now stood. Her father had been a short-order cook at a diner that closed in 2001. Her mother worked nights at a garment warehouse until it automated and let go of 2/3 of its staff in a single quarter. The lesson of her childhood was simple, and she learned it early. If you wanted something warm on the table, you made it yourself and you did not wait for someone to notice. She married at 24, a man named Devon who was funny and generous and very bad at holding a job. They had Marcus. They had Nadia. Devon left 4 years into the marriage, not in anger, just in his customary drift, and Celestine watched him go and did not chase him because she had 2 children and a month of rent to find, and she did not have the energy for grief she could not afford. She got a job at a hospital cafeteria. She was fast and reliable, and she could cook anything well. The supervisor liked her. The doctors and nurses started requesting her dishes. The hospital was 40 minutes by bus, and she left every morning at 6:15 to make it on time, and she did not miss a shift in 3 years. The idea for the cart came to her in pieces. She had watched other vendors at a street market near her mother's house. She had done the math on margins in a notebook at her kitchen table. She had talked to a woman named Bernice who ran a Caribbean plate lunch near the transit hub and learned what she needed to know about licenses and propane suppliers and which corners the city had traditionally allowed. Bernice had told her, flat out, that the east side of Dunbar was the best corner nobody was working because the foot traffic from the hospital shift changes moved through there at 6 and again at 8. Her brother Marcus Sr. had spent 3 weekends building the cart. She had spent $900 on her starting supplies and kept a running ledger in the same notebook. She opened on a Tuesday in late October, 6 years before anyone would know her name. The first winter nearly broke her. She cleared less than $300 in her best week. She kept the hospital cafeteria job and worked the cart on evenings and weekends. Her mother moved in to watch the children. She slept 5 hours most nights and told herself that 5 was enough because it had to be. By the second year, she found her footing. The hospital workers came. The office people on their way home from the parking structure came. The stew, which she made from a recipe her father had kept in a water-stained notebook and which she had quietly improved over a decade of practice, developed a reputation that moved by word of mouth the way good things do, slowly and surely. People came back. People brought their co-workers. She quit the cafeteria job in October of the 3rd year. She charged $4 for the bowl because she had watched her own family make choices at that price point. $4 was the number her father had always said a meal should cost to be real food, and not an apology. She kept it at $4 for 6 years, and she did not raise it even when the propane went up and the onions went up, and her feet hurt in a way that had started to become permanent. What she did not know was that the person who would change her life had eaten her stew for the first time in the 5th week of her first year. Leonard had not come looking for Celestine's cart. He had been in a car that got stuck in traffic on Dunbar after a late board meeting, and Roy had rolled the window down to let some air in, and the smell of that stew had come through the window, and Leonard had asked Roy to pull over. He was a man who had grown up with money but had not been raised with taste. His mother had cooked Ghanaian food on Sundays, slow food, careful food, the kind that took all afternoon and filled the house. She had died when Leonard was 19. He had spent the next 20 years in boardrooms and expense account restaurants, and had eaten well enough and felt almost nothing. The bowl of stew cost him $4. He ate it sitting in the back of the car and did not say anything for a long time. Roy watched him in the rearview mirror and recognized something he had not seen on Leonard's face in many years. Roy had no word for it. It was something like peace. Leonard came back 3 nights later. He came back the week after that. By the end of the 2nd month, it had become what it would remain for nearly 4 years. A ritual. A fixed point in a life that was otherwise relentless and untethered. He never told Celestine his name. She called him Sir, because that was her way and he did not correct her. He watched her work. He watched her move from the burner to the serving station with a steadiness that impressed him. He watched her handle a crowd of 8 at once on a Friday without raising her voice. She had a system. Everything on that cart had a place, and she moved through the system the way people move when they built it themselves, without hesitation, without looking down at her hands, the ladle, the lid, the napkin folded across her wrist. He watched her in rain with a poncho over her uniform, keeping the stew at the right temperature with one hand while she made change with the other. He watched her on a night in November when the temperature dropped fast and the line was long, and she pulled fingerless gloves from her apron pocket and put them on without breaking her rhythm. He watched her turn once to say something to the boy on the bicycle who idled near the cart most Fridays, a neighbourhood kid who looked no older than 13, and he watched her set aside a covered container without any ceremony at all, just set it on the milk crate and look at the boy briefly, and the boy took it and rode away. He never saw her charge him. He watched her close up alone in December, cold, breaking down the setup with the practiced speed of someone who had done it 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. He started to understand what he was looking at. He had been in business long enough to recognize the particular quality of someone who has internalized their work so completely that the work is no longer effort. It is simply how they are in the world. He had paid consultants large amounts of money to try to articulate this quality in the language of operations and leadership, and they had never quite gotten there. Celestine had it without a name for it, in a battered cart on a cold corner for $4 a bowl. On the night he came closest to saying something, there was a problem with the cart. A fitting on the propane line had cracked and the burner kept going out. Celestine was resetting it every few minutes, apologizing to the line, staying calm. A man in line made a comment about whether the food was even safe. Celestine told him quietly and without heat that the food was fine and the equipment was being handled. The man left. She reset the burner. The line moved. She did not stop working. Leonard sat in his car and watched her and felt something he could only describe as shame. Though it took him a long time to land on that word. He had resources that could fix that cart in a single phone call. He had resources that could change the entire shape of her operation. He had done nothing with those resources. He told himself it was because she had not asked. He told himself it was because people who work with dignity deserve to have that dignity respected and not swamped by someone else's money. He had seen what happened when people with resources arrived at small operations uninvited, the way the help shifted something, made the person receiving it smaller rather than larger, turned a proud thing into a charity case. He did not want to do that to Celestine. He told himself a great many things over the following weeks, and none of them entirely satisfied him, but he kept coming back. And he kept saying nothing, and he kept paying $4 and $2 for the bowl and the side. He had a way, when something was unresolved, of letting it sit in the back of his mind for months at a time. He had built his company partly on this practice, on the willingness to hold a question open rather than rush to a transaction. His board sometimes found it maddening. His operations chief called it deliberate. Roy just called it Leonard. Whatever it was the thing he brought to the question of Celestine. And he let it sit, and he kept coming, and some part of him understood that the sitting itself was not nothing. He was a witness. That had to be worth something, even if he had not yet figured out what to do with what he'd seen. What changed everything was a Wednesday in March, in the 6th year of her cart. Celestine's son Marcus was 12 by then, tall and serious, the kind of boy who kept a book in his back pocket and read on the bus. He had his mother's economy of movement, the same way of doing exactly what needed doing, and not more. He had started coming by the cart on late evenings to help his mother break down the setup and walk home with her. Celestine did not ask him to. He just started appearing at 9:30, his backpack on his shoulders, quiet and steady. She'd noticed the first time he showed up unannounced, standing at the edge of the cone of light from the cart's work lamp, and she had not said anything about it because sometimes the right response to a thing your child does is to let it stand. He was at the age where she could not always reach him in the usual ways. The cart seemed to be one of the places he could show up and just be useful, and she accepted that without comment. On that Wednesday, Marcus arrived at the cart and told his mother something that she could see in his face before he said it. Her daughter Nadia had been sent to the school nurse that afternoon with a pain in her side that would not go away. The nurse had called their grandmother. Their grandmother had called Celestine. Celestine had stood at her cart with a line of 8 customers and could not leave, and had sent Marcus to check on his sister, and had spent 3 hours not knowing what she would find when she got home. Marcus told her Nadia was resting and probably fine. Probably. Their mother had taken her temperature. It was normal. The pain, though, had lasted most of the afternoon. Celestine finished the last of the service and began to close up with shaking hands. Marcus took the crates from her and did not comment on the shaking. Leonard was parked at his usual distance. Roy could see from his posture that something was different on the cart tonight. Leonard got out of the car. He walked to the cart and he waited. Celestine looked up. "You're closing?" he said. "Yes, sir." Family situation. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the boy loading crates. He looked at Celestine's hands, the way they were moving slightly faster than usual. The way she was pulling the lids with a small, unnecessary urgency that told him she needed to be somewhere else. "I hope everything is all right," he said. "My daughter's not feeling well," Celestine said. She did not know why she told him. She had not told a customer anything personal in 6 years. She thought afterward that it was simply because the truth was so present in her. That night it came out before she could decide otherwise. She had spent 3 hours not knowing what she would find when she got home. 3 hours of the burner and the ladle and the change and the people moving through and the smile she kept in place because the people moving through did not need to know about her 9-year-old daughter and her own fear. And now it was closing, and the fear was closer to the surface, and the man in front of her had asked an honest question. Leonard nodded. He reached into his coat and laid a $50 bill on the counter. "For tonight," he said. "Please go be with your family." Celestine looked at the bill. "I can't take that," she said. "You didn't eat tonight." "I know," he said. "Please." She picked up the bill. She looked at him with the particular steadiness of a woman who has accepted help before and knows the difference between help and pity. What she saw on his face was neither. She could not name what it was. She had served him hundreds of times and had never looked at him closely enough to try, because there were always 6 other people in line and a burner to watch and change to make. Now there was just him and Marcus in the empty corner, and the bill warm in her hand. "Thank you," she said. He walked back to his car. He did not look back. She watched him go for a moment, the careful way Roy opened the door, the way Leonard folded himself into the back seat, and then Marcus was at her elbow with the last crate, and she turned toward home. She went home. Nadia was lying on the couch with a heating pad on her stomach, looking small and pale, and trying to look like she was fine, which was a face Celestine recognized because Celestine made the same face. Her mother was in the kitchen. Marcus sat down next to his sister and opened his book, but did not read it. Celestine made tea. She checked Nadia's temperature. Normal. She sat on the edge of the coffee table and looked at her daughter and weighed the things she could not know against the things she did know, which was that something was wrong enough that her daughter had gone to the nurse, and that the pain was still there 8 hours later. She told herself it was probably nothing. At 2 a.m, the pain came back, and it was worse. Nadia woke Celestine with a hand on her arm and a face that said it was not nothing. Celestine called an ambulance calmly, and then she sat on the edge of Nadia's bed and held her hand and told her it was going to be fine. And she kept her voice steady because that was what her daughter needed. Nadia had appendicitis. The surgery was performed at 4 a.m. It was routine, the surgeon said. She would recover completely. She was home in 2 days. Those 2 days in the hospital were some of the longest of Celestine's life, measured not in hours but in the distance between her daughter's face in the recovery room and the face Celestine needed to keep on her own. Steady, reassuring, a face that said nothing to fear. She was good at that face. She had practiced it for years, at the cart in the cold, at the hospital cafeteria during the years she worked both, in the morning when the children were still asleep, and she looked at the numbers in her notebook and knew they were closer to the edge than she ever let anyone see. Celestine went back to the cart the following Monday. She had missed 4 nights. She had lost roughly $320 in service. She had spent 14 hours in a hospital with a 9-year-old who was frightened and in pain, and she had held herself together by talking quietly and making Nadia laugh when she could and not sleeping more than an hour at a stretch. She reset the burners on Monday afternoon and opened at her usual time. Leonard came that night. He ordered his usual. He did not mention the week. He paid his $6 and said, "I'm glad things are better." "She's home," Celestine said. "Thank you again." He nodded. He went back to his car. What Celestine did not know, and what Roy would not understand until much later, was that in the 3 days following Nadia's surgery, Leonard had done 2 things. The first was that he had a member of his operations staff run a thorough but quiet background search. Not on Celestine, because he felt instinctively that that was wrong. On the corner, on the cart registration, on the business license, on what was publicly knowable about a food vendor at that address who had operated there for 6 years. The second thing he did was that he sat with what he found and made a decision about what it meant. What he found was the public record of a woman who had not missed a city-mandated inspection in 6 years, who had never had a health violation, who had renewed her license every year on time and in full, who had, in the most recent municipal vendor survey, been cited as one of 12 street food vendors in the city whose operations were described by the inspector as exemplary. He did not act on this information immediately. That was not his way. He thought about it for several weeks. He thought about it while sitting in board meetings. He thought about it at his kitchen table at 6 in the morning before his chef arrived. He thought about it in the back of Roy's car on the way to the cart on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He kept asking himself the same question. It was not a complicated question. What did this woman need from him that money alone could not supply? And what could he offer that was actually worth offering? He was a man who had spent his adult life making transactions. He was good at transactions. He understood value. What he was less certain about was how to offer something to a person who had never asked for anything. The answer came to him in a form he did not expect. There was a woman on his board of directors named Pauline, who ran her own food and hospitality company. 8 restaurants and a catering operation, all built from a single carry-out shop she had opened at 26. Leonard had known Pauline for 9 years. He respected her, and she respected him, and they had never once talked about anything other than business. He called her on a Thursday afternoon and asked if she had time for a conversation that was not about business. Pauline said yes, because she had learned over the years that when Leonard asked for something unusual, it was worth paying attention to. He told her about the cart. He told her about 6 years of watching. He told her about the propane fitting and the Wednesday in March. He told her about the inspection records. He did not tell her what he wanted to do, because he was not yet certain what it was. He described what he had observed and let Pauline form her own opinion. Pauline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You want to know if she has the foundation to scale." Leonard said, "I want to know what she would need." Pauline said she would go and eat at the cart. She went the following Tuesday alone in plain clothes, a woman in a good coat made deliberately unremarkable by the scarf she'd wound around it. She ordered the stew and the plantains and a cup of the ginger drink that Celestine had recently added to the menu. She ate at the curb with the people from the hospital shift change. She listened to the conversations around her. A nurse in scrubs talked about a patient she'd been worrying about. A man in a hard hat ate without taking his phone out of his pocket. An elderly couple shared one order of plantains. Pauline watched Celestine work the line and took careful note of what she was seeing. She came back the next 2 Tuesdays and watched again. The third visit, she arrived early, before the line built, and stood at the counter and talked to Celestine about the stew. Not about the business, about the food. She asked where the pepper base came from, how long the tomatoes went in before the stock. Celestine looked at her with the particular attention of someone who does not give away recipes but is deciding whether this person is worth the exception. She told her a little, not all of it. Pauline went home and thought about what she had seen. Then she called Leonard. The food, Pauline said, is exceptional. Not good for a cart. Exceptional, full stop. The peanut stew is the best version of that dish I have eaten in this city. She runs service like someone who has been doing it for 20 years, which she essentially has. Her margins are better than 2 of my restaurants, which I say as someone who has thought very hard about margins. Her waste is almost nothing. She has a repeating customer base that is genuinely loyal, which is the hardest thing in food to build and the one thing you cannot manufacture with money or marketing. She paused. She has been doing this entirely alone. Leonard said, yes. Pauline said, what are you planning to do? Leonard said, I think I would like to offer her a partnership to open a real space. Proper kitchen, proper seating, her recipes, her operation, her name on the door, capital from me, business development from you if you're willing, 60% hers from day one. There was a pause. That's not how most people do these things, Pauline said. I know, he said. She might say no. She might, Leonard said. She has the right to. Pauline said she was in. She said it without hesitation, which was not something Pauline did often. She had built her own company from a carry-out counter, and she understood what she had seen at that cart, and she understood what the failure to offer this woman the right resources would mean. Some things you do not walk away from. This was one of them. The question then was how to approach Celestine without making her feel surveilled or diminished or managed. Leonard thought about this for another 2 weeks. He thought about the way she had looked at him on the night of the $50 bill, that particular steadiness of someone who knows the difference between help and pity. He did not want to arrive with a plan she had not been part of making. He didn't want to be a man who showed up with a briefcase and an offer and expected gratitude. He decided to tell the truth. He came to the cart on a Thursday evening in late May when the light was still in the sky and the line was short. He waited until the last customer was served. He stood at the counter. Celestine looked up at him. The usual? Not tonight, he said. I'd like to talk to you if you have a few minutes when you're closed. My name is Leonard Ashford. I've been coming to this cart for almost 4 years. Celestine looked at him. She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. She looked at the man she had called Sir for 4 years, and she recalibrated every memory of every night he had stood at her counter, and she did not say anything for a moment. I know, Leonard said. I should have said so years ago. I kept not knowing how. Why didn't you? She said. Her voice was level. Because I came here to eat, he said, and the food is the best thing I have eaten in 20 years. I didn't want to make it about anything other than that. Celestine looked at him for a long time. What changed? She said. Your daughter, he said. When you told me about her, I thought about it for a long time. I thought about what I had been watching for 4 years and what it deserved. I think you deserve more than this corner. Celestine's hands were on the counter. She did not move them. This corner, she said, has kept my family. I know it has, Leonard said, and I'm not suggesting you leave it behind. I'm suggesting you build on top of it. She told him to say what he meant. He said it plainly. A proper space, her kitchen, her name, her control of the food, capital from him, business partnership from Pauline, who she could meet or not meet as she chose. 60% ownership, hers, from the first day. He had already identified 3 vacant commercial kitchen spaces in the East Side corridor within half a mile of where she stood. Celestine listened without moving. When he was done, she said, Why? He said, Because the food is worth it, because the work you have put into 6 years at this corner deserves to last longer than this cart will. And because I sat in my car on a Wednesday in March and watched you handle everything alone with shaking hands, and I did nothing useful. And I have thought about that every week since. Celestine was quiet for a while. The traffic moved on Dunbar. A bus passed. Somewhere down the block, someone's music drifted and faded. I need to think, she said. Of course, he said. I need to talk to my mother and my children. Of course. And I need to know that if I say no, you'll keep coming to the cart. Leonard almost smiled. Yes, he said. I'll keep coming to the cart. She said she would have an answer in 2 weeks. She took 3 weeks. She met with Pauline, who came in plain clothes again and sat across from Celestine at her mother's kitchen table, and answered every question Celestine asked, of which there were many, and answered them with the kind of directness that Celestine recognized as the language of someone who had also built something from nothing. She asked about the ownership structure 3 different times in 3 different ways to make certain she understood it. Pauline answered each time without impatience. Celestine talked to her mother for a long time. Her mother had known hardship the same way Celestine had, close and chronic, and her counsel was not to be taken lightly. Her mother said, "You worked 6 years to be exactly as good as you are. That is what they are paying for. You are not trading anything away. You are being compensated for what you already built." Celestine talked to Marcus, who was 12 and serious, and who said, in his measured way, "Mom, your food is the best food I have ever eaten, and I am not just saying that. Other people deserve to eat it too." She talked to Nadia, who said, "Will we get to eat there for free?" Celestine called Leonard on a Sunday evening. She said, "Yes." The space they found was on the ground floor of a mixed-use building 4 blocks from the cart. It had been a deli for 11 years and had been vacant for 8 months. The kitchen was sound. The footprint was 1,200 square feet, enough. The renovation took 9 weeks. Celestine was at the space every day of those 9 weeks, and the contractor later told Pauline that she was the most exacting client he had worked with since a hotel renovation he'd done in 2018, which he meant as a compliment. She had opinions about the ventilation. She had opinions about the counter height and the position of the hood, and the location of the prep station relative to the service window. She walked the space on the second day and pointed to 7 things and explained why each one needed to change, and the contractor listened and wrote them down and changed 6 of the 7. The 7th was structural, and she understood when he explained it. She spent evenings planning the menu expansion at her kitchen table, her father's notebook open beside her own. She added 3 dishes that she had been making at home for years but had never had the proper kitchen to produce at volume. She kept the stew. She kept the plantains. She kept the ginger drink. Everything she added was connected to something she already knew how to make, because she did not believe in stretching further than your foundations would hold. She thought carefully about what the room needed to feel like. Not a restaurant exactly, in the way a chain restaurant feels like itself. More like a kitchen that happened to have seats. She chose warm wood for the counter, the same colour as the cutting board her father had kept for 30 years. She chose simple pendant lights, nothing elaborate. She chose chairs with a slight give because she wanted the people who sat in them to be comfortable staying longer than they had planned. She kept the cart running through the entire renovation. She hired her cousin Delia, who had worked food service for 10 years, to run the cart on weeknights while Celestine supervised the build-out. She did not want to lose the corner customers during the transition. She told Delia, "They trusted the corner. The corner stays open." The restaurant opened on a Thursday in October, 3 years and 7 months after Leonard had first rolled down the car window on Dunbar and smelled something that stopped him. She named it after her father. The sign over the door said simply, "Cecil's." The night it opened, the line went out the door and down the block. Celestine stood in her kitchen and sent food out with the steadiness she had carried for 6 years in the cold. The same stew, the same plantains, the same ginger drink now poured into proper glasses. The same $4 price which Pauline had tried gently to raise, and Celestine had declined to budge on, because $4 was the number her father had always said. Leonard came in at 8:30, which was his time. He was seated at a small table near the back. He ordered the stew and the plantains. He paid $6. He left a $40 tip. He ate in the same quiet that he had maintained for 4 years in the back of Roy's car, except that now he was surrounded by the sound of a room full of people who had found the food and would be back, and the sound of Celestine's kitchen and the particular warmth of a space that had been built with intention. Celestine came out near closing and stood at his table. "Well?" she said. "Exactly right," he said. She nodded. She went back to her kitchen. Roy, who had driven Leonard to the opening and was eating at the counter near the front, had watched the exchange. He thought about the 4 years of that corner, the black car slowing in the dark, the exact change, the silence on the drive home. He thought about the night in March when Leonard had laid a $50 bill on a folding counter. He thought about what it meant that the man had come for 4 years to a cart in the cold and had never told anyone why. Roy decided he understood it now. What Leonard had found at that corner was the thing he had not eaten in 20 years. A meal made with the full attention of someone who cared about the person eating it, not for recognition, not for profit, because that was what the food was supposed to be. He had come back every night he was in town because he needed to be near that particular quality of care. He had come back the way you return to a thing that reminds you of what matters. And at some point, the returning had become the truest thing in his weekly life. Celestine would learn all of this over time, not in a single conversation, but in the way you learn things about people who show up consistently and without pretense. Leonard became a regular in the way he had always been a regular, except now he sat at a proper table and the food came to him and the room was warm. In the second year, Cecil's was reviewed by the city's main food publication. The review called the peanut stew the best version of the dish available anywhere in the metro area. It mentioned the price, it mentioned the history, it did not mention Leonard. In the third year, Celestine expanded into a catering arm and hired 3 additional cooks. Her cousin Delia now managed both the cart, which remained open at its corner, and the front-of-house scheduling at Cecil's. Marcus had turned 15 and was saving money from weekend work. Nadia had turned 13 and had developed strong opinions about the plantain prep that Celestine took seriously because the opinions were correct. The loan that Leonard had extended to capitalize the space was repaid in full at the end of the second year. He had set a low interest rate, and Celestine had paid ahead of schedule because that was her way. When she handed him the final payment at his office in an envelope because she did not do wire transfers for things that mattered, he told her the interest had covered his costs and that he considered it the best investment he had made in 5 years. She said, "The best is still the stew." He said, "Yes, it is." She walked out of his office building into afternoon light, the same woman who had worked 5 hours a night in the cold for 6 years, except that her name was on a door now and her father's name was on a sign, and the food her father had taught her to make was feeding a room full of people every night and would keep feeding them. She stopped on the sidewalk outside the building and stood in the light for a moment. She thought about that first winter, the $300 a week, the backup propane canister, the bungee cords on the tarp. She thought about the Wednesday in March when Marcus had arrived at the cart with news she already knew from his face. She thought about a man in a dark coat who had laid a $50 bill on a folding counter and said, "Please." Kindness, her father used to say, is bread thrown on water. You may not see where it lands. It lands. She had thought about that saying for 30 years without being entirely sure she believed it. Now she walked down the sidewalk to her car. The woman who had opened a restaurant on a corner of the east side 4 blocks from where she used to prop up a tarp with bungee cords, and she believed it completely. Cecil's is still open. The cart is still at Dunbar and 5th, rain or shine. The stew is still $4. If you have ever done something quietly and faithfully for a very long time without expecting anyone to notice, tell us in the comments. And if you want to hear another story about the kind of person the world forgets to see until the right moment, stay close. The key to Cecil's hangs on a hook in Celestine's kitchen, next to a photograph of her father at a diner counter 30 years ago, wearing a cook's apron and looking directly at the camera like a man who already knows something good is coming. She had put it there on opening night. It had not moved since. Had not.